The neighborhood was supposed to be Marcus's fresh start. He had worked hard, saved for years, and finally bought himself a modest but beautiful home in a quiet cul-de-sac where the lawns were green, the sidewalks clean, and the promise of peace seemed almost guaranteed. After years of living in the city, where noise and traffic were constant companions, this suburban life felt like a breath of fresh air. He imagined evenings on the porch with a glass of sweet tea, mornings where birds replaced car horns, and weekends where he could finally relax. But all of those expectations began to unravel the day Karen entered the picture. Karen wasn't hard to notice. She was the type of woman who made herself known whether you wanted to know her or not. Tall, always dressed in some overly bright floral blouse and armed with a voice that carried 2 blocks over. She strutted around as though she owned not just her property, but everyone else's too. She was the self-proclaimed leader of the HOA, though the HOA board technically had other members. Still, she was the one neighbors dreaded bumping into because it always meant some unsolicited comment about their lawn height, their trash bins, or whether their shutters were community appropriate. At first, Marcus ignored her. He knew better than to engage in petty neighbor politics, but his patience began to wear thin the first time he pulled into his street and saw her gleaming white SUV sitting directly in his driveway. For a second he thought he had made a wrong turn, that maybe it wasn't his house, but no. There was his mailbox, his freshly painted fence, and his name on the front. And yet there was Karen's vehicle sitting as if she had every right to be there. Marcus parked on the street that night, thinking perhaps it was a mistake. Maybe she had visitors. Maybe her driveway was blocked. Maybe there was some emergency. The benefit of the doubt was easy to give on the first try. The next morning he knocked on her door, introduced himself politely, and asked if she had left her car there by accident. Karen smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and said, "Oh, it was just temporary. You have such a wide driveway, I didn't think you'd mind. Besides, we discourage parking on the street here. HOA rules, you know." Marcus nodded slowly, though confusion stirred in him. It didn't make sense. Her own driveway had been empty. "Well, I'd appreciate it if you didn't park there again. It makes it hard for me to pull in after work." Of course," she replied with mock sweetness. "Won't happen again," except it did. The very next day, in fact. He came home from work late, exhausted, only to see that same SUV glinting under the streetlights, parked neatly in his driveway like it belonged. This time frustration pricked at him. He knocked again, though not as politely, and told her it was becoming an issue. Karen rolled her eyes. "Marcus, dear, it's just a car. Why make a fuss? You're new here, so let me explain. Around here, we all make little sacrifices for the greater good of the neighborhood. It's what keeps this community beautiful." He wanted to tell her that she wasn't asking for a sacrifice, she was trespassing. But Marcus, always measured, simply said, "Karen, don't park in my driveway again." "I'm not asking twice." For a few days she complied. Marcus thought maybe, just maybe, the message had sunk in. But Karen was not the type of woman to be told no without consequences. Her sense of entitlement ran deeper than most people could fathom. Within the week, her car was back in his driveway, and the way it sat there, gleaming and arrogant, made Marcus feel as though she had parked it just to prove a point, that this was her neighborhood, not his, and he was just a guest in it. The audacity of it all made him laugh bitterly as he parked on the street again. But the inconvenience was piling up. Groceries had to be carried farther, and guests who visited were forced to park blocks away because Karen's vehicle hogged his space. It wasn't just about parking anymore, it was about respect, about property, about the unspoken rules of being a neighbor. One Saturday morning, as Marcus was washing his car on the curb, another neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, walked by and shook her head. "She's been doing this for years," she whispered. "Before you moved in, she used to park in the Jenkins driveway. They moved out not long after. She's difficult," Marcus frowned. "So nobody's ever stopped her?" "People try," Mrs. Patterson said, her eyes darting toward Karen's house. "But she runs the HOA. People are scared she'll find them or make their lives miserable. It's easier to put up with her than fight her." Marcus felt a slow burn in his chest. He wasn't about to let fear dictate how he lived in his own home. Still, he tried to remain calm. He approached Karen one last time, laying his words down clearly. "This is my driveway. If I see your car there again, I'll have it towed." "That's not a threat, it's a promise." Karen's smirk in response was infuriating. She tilted her head and said, "Tow it if you dare. But remember, Marcus, I am the HOA. You'll regret crossing me." That night, Marcus sat on his porch sipping tea, watching the SUV sit smugly in his driveway once more. And as the sun dipped behind the houses, he realized something important. Some people don't learn from kindness. They learn only from consequence. Marcus had never been the type to seek out conflict. His whole life he had tried to lead with patience, with calm reasoning, with the belief that people would respect boundaries if you simply explained them. But as the tow truck's headlights turned the corner that night, his heart pounded with something different: resolve. The driver, a stocky man with grease-stained hands and a baseball cap pulled low, hopped out of the cab and gave Marcus a look that was both tired and amused. "You the one called in about the SUV?" he asked, glancing toward Karen's vehicle that sat smugly in the middle of Marcus's driveway. "Yeah," Marcus said, his voice steady. "That's the one. Belongs to my neighbor. She keeps parking here after I've told her not to." The driver let out a low whistle, circling the car like a predator eyeing prey. "Man, people got nerve. I've been doing this 20 years, and I'll tell you, nothing riles folks up like taking their car away. You ready for the storm?" Marcus gave a small, humorless smile. "She'll get over it. Or she'll stop." The driver chuckled, hooked the SUV up to the tow chain, and within minutes the vehicle was lifted onto the flatbed. The sound of metal clanking echoed across the street, loud enough that porch lights flicked on one by one. Curtains shifted in windows. Neighbors peeked out like owls, curious about the commotion. By the time the truck rumbled down the street with Karen's prized possession in tow, Marcus knew he had made a statement. The next morning, at precisely 8 o'clock, the storm arrived. Karen stormed up his walkway like a tornado, her robe flying open, hair disheveled, slippers slapping against the concrete. She banged on his door with the fury of someone demanding justice. Marcus opened the door, coffee mug in hand, and greeted her with the calmness of a man who had been expecting this very scene. "Where is my car?" Karen shrieked, her voice carrying so loud it startled a few birds from the tree nearby. "Don't play dumb with me, Marcus. I know you had something to do with it." Marcus sipped his coffee unbothered. "Good morning to you too, Karen. If you're looking for your car, you might want to check with the tow company. They were kind enough to remove it from my driveway last night." Her face turned scarlet. "You had no right." "Actually," Marcus said evenly, "I had every right. It's my driveway. You've been told multiple times not to park there. Actions have consequences." Karen's fists clenched at her sides. "Do you have any idea who you're dealing with? I am the HOA. I can fine you. I can make your life miserable. You can stop parking in my driveway," Marcus interrupted, his voice cutting through her tirade like a knife. "That's all you have to do. Otherwise, every time you put that SUV in my space, it'll end up on a tow truck again. Simple as that." Neighbors had begun to gather, pretending to water their plants or collect their mail, but everyone's ears were tuned to the showdown happening on Marcus's porch. Karen's humiliation was palpable. She stomped off with promises of revenge, shouting about lawyers and HOA regulations, but Marcus simply closed his door and let the silence swallow her fury. For a few days, peace returned. Karen's SUV remained firmly planted in her own driveway, and Marcus allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the lesson had stuck. He went about his routine, work, gym, evenings on the porch, and felt the tension in his shoulders ease. But people like Karen didn't change. They didn't surrender. They waited. That Friday, Marcus came home with a trunk full of groceries after a long day at work. His feet ached, his stomach grumbled, and all he wanted was to unload his bags and collapse on the couch. But as he turned into his street, his heart sank. There it was again, her white SUV, bold as brass, parked dead center in his driveway as if the previous tow had never happened. Marcus parked on the street, his eyes narrowing as he stared at the vehicle. A part of him almost laughed. Was she truly this stubborn? Was her pride so deep that she'd rather risk another tow than admit she was wrong? Apparently so. He carried his bags inside, shaking his head, and dialed the tow company once more. "Same address, same car?" the driver said on the phone, chuckling. "Same everything," Marcus replied. "This lady must be crazy. Don't worry, we'll take care of it." Within half an hour, the truck arrived. This time, Marcus stood outside with his arms crossed as the SUV was hooked up. A few neighbors had gathered, whispering among themselves, some grinning behind their hands. Karen's defiance was becoming neighborhood theater, and Marcus was unintentionally the star of the show. As the truck pulled away, Marcus caught sight of Karen's curtains twitching. She had seen it this time. He almost wished he could see her reaction in full, but he didn't have to wait long. Less than 10 minutes later, she burst out of her house, still in her work clothes, heels clacking furiously against the pavement. "You've done it again," she screamed, marching up to him as he leaned casually against his fence. "You're harassing me. This is harassment. I'll have you arrested, you'll see." Marcus tilted his head. "Harassment would be me parking in your driveway every day after being told not to. This is just me enforcing my rights as a homeowner." "You smug little," she started, but caught herself as more neighbors emerged, clearly enjoying the spectacle. Her face flushed even redder as she realized her audience was no longer sympathetic. "You know what, Marcus?" she snapped, jabbing a finger at him. "You'll regret this. The HOA will make your life a living nightmare." "Funny thing about nightmares," Marcus said calmly. "They only scare you if you let them. I sleep just fine at night." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, words failing her for once. She spun on her heel and stomped back to her house, the sound of her door slamming echoing down the street. That night, Marcus sat on his porch again, the crickets chirping, the air cool against his skin. For the first time since moving in, he felt truly at peace. The war with Karen wasn't over. He knew that much, but he had drawn his line in the sand. She could rage, she could threaten, she could try to pull the strings of the HOA all she wanted, but as long as Marcus lived there, his driveway was his, and no amount of entitlement would change that. Inside his house, his phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Patterson, the neighbor who had warned him before. "Good for you," it read. She needed someone to stand up to her. "About time." Marcus smiled, setting the phone down. He hadn't just reclaimed his driveway. He had made a statement to the whole neighborhood. He wasn't a man to be pushed around. And Karen? She was finally beginning to realize it. Karen was not the type to accept defeat quietly. If there was one thing she despised more than anything, it was being made to look foolish. And Marcus had done exactly that. Twice. To have her precious SUV hauled off in front of her neighbors was humiliation she couldn't forgive. She'd spent years cultivating her role as the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood, strutting around and enforcing rules with a smug sense of authority. In her mind, she had always been untouchable, but Marcus had dared to challenge that illusion, and for the first time people saw cracks in her power. She told herself she'd get even. She promised herself Marcus would regret making her look weak. But deep down, a seed of fear had been planted. Marcus didn't flinch when she screamed at him. He didn't cower when she threatened him with HOA fines. He wasn't like the others who bent under her weight. And the neighbors knew it too. That was what burned the most. Still, Karen tried. The very next day, she showed up on Marcus's porch again, pounding on his door with a ferocity that shook the frame. Marcus opened it slowly, deliberately, as if he had all the time in the world. He looked at her the way a teacher looks at a child who hasn't learned their lesson. "You're going to regret this," Karen shouted, her face flushed. "I've already called the HOA board and we're drafting fines. You'll be paying hundreds, maybe thousands by the time I'm through with you, and don't think I won't call the police. You can't just tow people's cars like that." Marcus leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, completely calm. "Karen, you don't scare me. Not with your HOA, not with your empty threats. The law's clear. If you park on my property without permission, it's trespassing. And I can have it towed every single time. Doesn't matter if it's once, twice, or 20 times. You do it again, your car is gone. End of story." The firmness in his tone silenced her for a moment. She opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again, trying to find the right words. But nothing came out. Neighbors had started peeking again, drawn by the noise. Curtains twitched, blinds lifted, and soon the whole block was watching. Karen realized she wasn't just arguing with Marcus. She was performing for the neighborhood. And she was losing. Her pride wouldn't let her walk away without saying something. "This isn't over," she hissed, jabbing her finger in his direction. "You'll regret ever moving here." Marcus didn't flinch. His eyes stayed locked on hers, steady and unyielding. "No, Karen," he said softly but firmly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "The only one who's going to regret anything is you, if you ever step on my property again." It was the first time anyone had spoken to her like that. The first time someone had stood in her path and refused to move. For a long moment, Karen stared at him, stunned into silence. Then without another word, she spun around and stormed back to her house, slamming the door so hard the echo lingered down the street. The neighborhood exhaled collectively. People who had once feared Karen's wrath now saw her differently. They saw that she could be challenged, that she could lose, that her power wasn't nearly as absolute as she liked to pretend. And Marcus, whether he wanted it or not, became the quiet hero of the block. From that day forward, Karen never parked in Marcus's driveway again. Her SUV stayed firmly in her own, though Marcus noticed how she lingered near her curtains, watching him whenever he came or went. The smirk she once wore whenever she saw him was gone, replaced with a tight-lipped scowl. Her arrogance hadn't disappeared, it never would, but her confidence had taken a hit she couldn't shake off. The change didn't stop there. Slowly, neighbors began to approach Marcus, small conversations at first, compliments on his lawn, offers to share tools, nods of approval. It was as if they had been waiting for someone to stand up to Karen so they could breathe again. Mrs. Patterson, the kindly older woman who had warned him before, came by with a plate of cookies one afternoon. "You've done what none of us could," she whispered, her eyes twinkling with relief. "You reminded her she's not the queen of this place." Marcus smiled, accepting the cookies. He hadn't set out to be anyone's champion. All he'd wanted was respect, peace, and the simple right to park in his own driveway. But he realized he'd done more than that. He'd shifted the balance of power in the neighborhood. Karen's grip was loosening and everyone could feel it. For Karen, the humiliation lingered. She tried, of course, to reassert herself. She sent out sternly worded HOA letters about grass height, trash cans, and holiday decorations. She muttered complaints whenever she walked her dog. She even staged a board meeting to try and rally support against Marcus. But the fire was gone. People had seen her SUV lifted onto that tow truck twice. They had seen her storm and scream and lose. And once people saw that, they couldn't unsee it. Marcus never gloated. He didn't need to. His calm, steady refusal to back down had spoken louder than any victory dance could. He continued with his life. Work, chores, evenings on the porch. Every time he pulled into his driveway, he felt a quiet satisfaction. It wasn't just about the parking spot anymore. It was about dignity. It was about boundaries. It was about proving that bullies, no matter how loud or entitled, could be stopped. The final act came weeks later. Karen crossed paths with Marcus on the sidewalk, her dog tugging at its leash. She glared at him, her lips pressed thin, but for the first time since he had moved in, she said nothing. No comment about his lawn. No snide remark about HOA rules. Just silence. It was the closest thing to surrender she would ever give. Marcus nodded politely and kept walking. He didn't need her apology. He didn't need her approval. He had something far better. His peace, his respect, and the knowledge that she would never again try to invade what was his. The neighborhood settled into a new rhythm. People felt freer, lighter, as though a shadow had lifted. And though Karen still lurked with her clipboard and her glare, everyone knew the truth. She had been beaten. Marcus didn't just reclaim his driveway. He reclaimed his home, and in the end, that was the sweetest victory of all. The story ends not with shouting or another battle, but with silence. The silence of a bully who had finally been put in her place, and the peace of a man who had stood tall and refused to be moved.